Well, greetings, compadres. Had an amazing opportunity that just came across my desk, basically. Um, I got to interview Stephen Marsh, who wrote On Writing and Failure. Stephen was my guest today, and my mind is still blown. I am still just kind of having that reverberation from being so inspired. This book came to me by way of my author friend, Ted Neal. And I'm not kidding. If you are writing, if you're considering writing, if you have written, if you have published, I highly recommend you pick up a copy of this book if you don't already have it. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Stephen before you listen to this just phenomenal hour of his time that he blessed us with. Stephen Marche is a novelist and essayist and the author of, among other works, On Writing and Failure. And I'm going to read you the subtitle of On Writing and Failure because it's cool. Okay, On Writing and Failure, or On the Peculiar Perseverance Required to Endure the Life of a Writer. And he has also written features and essays for the New Yorker, the New York Times, the Atlantic, Esquire, the Walrus, and many others. He has collaborated with artificial intelligence on the first AI-generated novel reviewed in the New York Times called Death of an Author, which we briefly touch on also in this interview, which is fascinating to me as a pro AI adopter. And also it should be mentioned that Ted Neal, who also makes a guest appearance in this interview, he's the one who introduced me to Stephen's book On Writing and Failure. Ted is a globetrotter and writer, and he has worked on 5 continents as an educator, health professional, and journalist. I don't want to say too much. I just really want you to enjoy digesting what Stephen had to share. I know you will hear what you are meant to hear in this next hour, that you'll get something incredible out of what Stephen says and buy his book, because if you hear something you like today, I just can't wait for you to get the book, because it is just filled with fascinating historical stories about struggle and strife. And also those stories meant something to Stephen, obviously. This book started out as a collection.
Welcome to Amy Liz Harrison's podcast, Eternally Amy, a mum of 8's journey from jail to joy, a Gen Xer who overcame her struggle with alcohol to become a best-selling author and mental health advocate. She shares stories of hope and offers ideas for others struggling with mental health challenges. One thing is for sure, you'll leave with something to chew on. And now, here's your host, Amy Liz Harrison.
You know, Stephen, I am beside myself fangirling right now, truly. I'm so thankful you came on. I can't even tell you. And, you know, I wanted to kick this off by telling you how I encountered your book. And this is it. This is my second copy, actually. This is On Writing and Failure by Stephen Marsh. And here's the thing. My first copy is so messed up. It's got coffee stains on it. It's got the curled edges, the ripped cover, because I literally read that like some kind of a ravenous bear after hibernation. I just really needed your words. So thank you so much for that. So
That's
anyway,
great.
yeah, loved it, loved it. So I have an author friend, Ted Neal, very seasoned author. And 4 years ago, when I published my first memoir about my journey from drunken mommy wine club member to sober, semi-functioning, reasonable mom of 8 and adult. It was Ted who I turned to during that time. I had had a terrible experience, which is not unique to me, but with a publisher where things had gone severely pear-shaped. And
Mhm.
Ted was kind of the recipient of my lamentations. So thank you, Ted. But he started recognizing, like, oh, she's going to need this book. And so he starts sending me excerpts from your book. And I mean, my favorite, well, no, I'm going to save that one. The one passage that resonated with me like immediately, and I didn't write down the page number, but it's like my whole book is highlighted. That's the problem, is that I keep going back and I'm like, the whole thing is highlighted and double underlined. But it's the part about connection. So you start off and you're saying, like, there are failures right now, rendering meaning, some will miscarry, some will not. And then you go on to, I'm paraphrasing, but you go on to talk about my connection, or my goal is to somehow be with you. And I actually think that that was something that somebody else had said, maybe, and you were quoting, and I could be wrong on this, but
Ovid, yeah.
Yeah, the whole idea I was trying to get across is like, oh yeah, no, these words are with me. In fact, these words are permeating my soul in a time of need where I just felt like crushed, And so
Mhm.
first of all, I just wanted to thank you so much for that, because, I don't think it's easy for any of us to kind of really just get as raw as you did. And me being in a 12-step fellowship, I'm accustomed to that, but then it has become surprising to me how um, it's a little off-putting sometimes to other
Yeah,
people when we do give that raw piece of ourselves and put it out there. And
yeah.
so, yeah. So I just wanted to say thank you for that. And so bottom line
You're
is,
welcome.
when Ted gave me, your book, it was almost like he was handing me the keys to a car and he was the parent, right? And I'm like a 16-year-old who just got my license, right? And he's like, and here's the keys and the map, like pre-internet days. Like, this is what you're going to need. And so, yeah, so I really felt like, uh, you know, yeah, Stephen
Well, that's
gets
great.
me.
I
Yeah.
mean, that was the hope for the connection. I think you have that hope with any book that you write. I mean, I think one of the weird things about writing as a profession is that you never see the effects of what you do, right? Like if you're a stand-up comedian, like you see people like the jokes either land or they don't, and and you never really know with the book what its effects are, what its consequences are. And I think that's the bad thing. It's also the good thing. Like it's also like you don't. It's someone out there is reading your stuff and you don't even know about it, and it's great. I also think it is amazing to me how much people lie about the process of being a writer. Like
Yes.
like I mean you talk about being raw, but like I don't really feel like I was being raw in this book. I felt I was being like basically honest. Not I don't feel like I was
Yeah.
giving I don't think I was like deep diving into my own like pathologies. I thought I was just being like this is what it looks like. And I know for a fact that that's what it looks like for almost everyone who does it. So but I think when you go on Instagram or you go on like everyone's like, oh look, I got this, I got that. I mean, and it kind of creates this impression that like the writer life is a bunch of successes, but of course it isn't.
Yeah, exactly. And I wonder, because this is what I keep coming back to, and I love that you brought up the comedian thing, because it's like, why on earth are we so writers? We're like in this position sort of where we're so heavily criticized. If I were like in marketing, for example, and I came up with an ad or a logo for something, and I asked like 10 different people, hey, what's your opinion on this? I get like 10 different answers, right? And so
Right.
I find that feedback is really difficult for me. And I love I mean, the whole idea that you keep using in the book about like the thin skin, it's like, oh, I feel like my skin has gotten thinner over time. Like, just
Yeah.
really, I'm like more sensitive to it. And then I don't want to be that person who's kind of the grouchy Gladys Kravitz, like, just, and yeah. And I'm wondering, do you feel like feedback and criticism actually makes us better writers? And twofold question, how
Mhm.
did you get used to it? How did you get used to it being part of just being an author?
Well, I think I mean, I don't really get feedback from anyone. Like I think I'm a little different because I understand that, most people, like a lot of people are in writing groups and things like this. I mean, I could never tolerate any of that at all. So I mean, I literally do not listen to any criticism by people who are not invested in the work. Right.
Mhm.
Like if I'm rejected by a publisher that they're not going to do the book, I and they give a long explanation, I ignore it. I don't even read it. But the
Mm.
moment someone is invested in the book, like anyone who's like an editor, like if I publish a piece in the New York Times and the editor has suggestions, I take them with maximum seriousness, right?
Mm.
And I take them, and I think every writer needs an editor. I am like
Mhm.
I'm 100% in that camp, right? Like I don't think there's no writer alive. Like, I did my PhD on Shakespeare, and like his bad plays, like the plays of his that are terrible, they're the ones where he never performed them. So he didn't have actors tell him like, I'm not going to say this. Like he didn't have the actors saying like, I'm not doing like 48 lines on this stuff. Like you're going to have
Yeah.
to cut this down, right? And like Shakespeare needed editors. Everyone needs editors. But I mean, one of the reasons I don't really do writers groups. I mean, I have been edited by friends at various points. Now I'm a little too old for that, but I just from having worked so long at various forms, like you always have to remember where people are coming from and what they want out of it, right? And like and that I think is perfectly natural. As for like getting used to criticism, like when people are in, like if I prefer to be edited. I like a strong editor. Like I don't resist that at all, right? And I mean I fight for what I believe in, but I certainly think a strong editorial presence is beneficial to the work. That's always been true for me, right? And I think it's true. Honestly think it's true for everyone on earth, right? As for like just getting used to rejection, like there is a point, like I was up to like 2,000 rejections when I stopped counting, and that was in my late 20s. Like if I really felt rejection like I've been rejected like 5 times this week. Like I don't like, and I mean, it makes absolutely no, like I'm not in a bad mood, like no, like nothing, like it's not like I don't feel like, oh, I need to go get a drink or something. Like I don't, it literally has no impact on me whatsoever. You have to take into account the selfishness of people that you're working with, and you have to understand that that's the most natural thing in the world. Like that's not something that's wrong with them, or that's not something that's unfair in the world. It's that people come from their own perspective, and you have to accept that, and you have to understand that that's actually kind of a strength.
Mhm. Yeah, and I love that because it takes the whole personal part out of it. It's like, okay, this is just not the right fit, or this, what?
100%. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, I've been around long enough to know that like the reason things are rejected is almost never the quality of the work. Like
Mm.
never, and the reason things are accepted is never the quality of the work. Like things don't succeed because they're super well written. Like that is not how this game works. Like the timing is right. The market is ready for it. Or the audience is there for it, right? And so it's like I think it's once you see that in action a bit, you really start to take things a lot less personally.
Love that. I love it. I love it. Ted, did you want to segue a little bit into talking about perseverance or asking questions about perseverance?
Did I had one question about kind of the origins of this essay before I got to that. Only because
Sure.
I looked at the whole field note series because I wanted to kind of figure out where it fit into that. And a lot of the other titles I saw were on property, on decline, on community, on risk. And
Yeah.
it occurred to me is somehow you came to the editors of this series and said, I don't want to do one just on failure. I want to do it on failure and writing, or writing and failure.
Mm.
And I was curious, how did that come about, that A, you're able to convince them to do a double-barreled one, and B, you felt that writing was the vehicle for that?
Well, I mean, those series that Dan does, and they're all great. I think he actually imagined them more as topical subjects. On Risk one was about the property market in Canada, and there was a they're more they're pamphlets, right? I mean, the beauty of them is you write them, they're published 6 months later, right? Like that's and Dan at Biblioasis is he's a big innovator. Like he's the most interesting publisher in Canada for sure. And but he came to me and said, "Do you have anything that you want to write?" Basically, and I said, "Well, I've always I kept a sort of common book, not a common book, but like a notebook of like the stories that are in this
Mm.
essay, because they were the ones that made me feel better." Right, like when things got really lousy, like the stories, the encouraging stories they tell writers, like J.K. Rowling was writing on scrap paper on the train from that's not helpful to me. Like it is very helpful to me to know that James Joyce couldn't get a job at an Italian technical college because they didn't think he knew enough about how to speak English. That is way more, it fits my life, much better than stories of huge wins, which are basically like lottery wins. Like that's not the business of this business, right? So it was, and I had them there, and he agreed. I mean, I think we did actually have a little kerfuffle about the title, but I didn't want to call it On Failure because I thought what I was talking about, I think writing is a very specific kind of failure. Like I think it's a very it dwells in failure in a very particular way that, like, for example, business does not, or personal failures don't. Like it has a unique relationship to failure as an activity. I mean, just for the basic reason that you usually throw out 95% of stuff that you write, right? I mean, like just for a beginning, right? And plus all the rejection, plus the basic failure at the core of writing, which is that what you write never means what you intend it to mean.
Mhm.
It means something different, and then that's true for all the great books too. That seems to me why it would be an appropriate title for it.
Mhm.
That, and you answered some of my other questions as well. So thank you for that. Because I had wondered
Oh,
how
no
you had
problem.
collected all those stories. And it seems like you had been
Yeah.
collecting for a long time.
The interesting thing was, like, I sat down to write it, and I had them like in note form, and then I was going to write the book, and I was like, well, I'll find out that it's not actually that bad. Like, it's all exaggerated stories. Like like what happened to Dostoevsky. I'll find out, like, actually it was sort of, he was exaggerating. And then I found out, like, when I did the research, like sat down to like get the biographies and figure out what happened, it was always way worse than I thought it was. It was always like, oh my God, this is this is infinitely worse than I thought it was. And so that was kind of interesting. I mean, I wrote it in the middle of COVID, right? I had nothing else to do but this book. All my assignments evaporated overnight. I would write a little bit in the morning and then go bird watching all day. Basically, that was like a year of my life.
Mhm.
And it's the funny thing was, it's like, I talk in the book about how, like, suffering is necessary, like maybe suffering is necessary, but like that's probably how I should be writing. I don't write that way now because of course I'm busy and I have to make a living. But like if I wrote for like an hour every morning with a fountain pen and then went bird watching for the rest of the day, that would probably lead to like really good work.
I need to find my mind blown emoji.
There you go.
Amy, I'll turn over to you.
So, okay, so Stephen, thank you for touching on intention, right? Because
Mhm.
I need to read just a little tiny piece of, this is my favorite part in this book, okay? This is page 67. I am writing these words now in a dark morning a few days before Christmas. The air has the latent cold of Canadian winter, and I have draped myself in a blanket decorated with stitchwork constellations. A strange, sentimental, sorry, I can't read this with
Sempiternal.
this. Yeah, thank you, because it's like so dark in here, but I'm trying.
I
I
love
said,
that word, sempiternal.
that's lovely. Fog is lifting on the street through a fragile and nebulous and tenuous network. These words have arrived with you. Perhaps you bought them. Perhaps you borrowed them. Perhaps you stole them. Perhaps a teacher forced them on you. Perhaps you're in jail. Perhaps you're in love. You might be reading them in a dorm room or the community space of an old folks' home, or on a beach in Belize, or in subway. Perhaps you're not reading these words at all because the publisher, now my pages are sticking together, because the publisher who commissioned them folded or refused them. I don't know. I can't know. And then you go on to talk about the discrepancy as a torment and how trying to communicate what's really going on in your head and put language to it is just so difficult, because you sort of don't know where it's going to land, who it's going to land on, where they're going to be in their life. And so what they're reading and understanding when the words come across their brain and their heart. And I just thought that was profound, because I think that's, the big ultimate challenge for me is always, am I making sense here? Is anybody getting
Right.
this? Right.
Yeah.
And
I mean, yeah. I think there's like, that's part of life too, right? Like, I
yeah.
mean, the lesson of the Bhagavad Gita is like, since your intentions never result in what you want, right?
Mhm.
Like, because that's just part of human life. Like, why do anything, right? And the answer they come up with is because you only have your intention, you only have your action. As the Bhagavad Gita says, you're entitled to the action, you're not entitled to the fruits of the action, right?
Mhm.
And I think that that's absolutely true for writing in a way that it's true for no other activity. I mean, the famous example is Gulliver's Travels, right, which was written as an indictment of all humanity and became a children's book. But nobody really knows what they're doing, right? Nobody knows nobody knows how a book will be received, because there's this gap between us as human
Mhm.
beings, and language is this very fine filament that we send out between this around this gap, but it's never really fully crossed, right? Like it's never gotten to the end of, right? And I think that that's um that kind of humility, like the humility of knowing that, I think is really essential to coming to some kind of peace
Mhm.
with your own powerlessness, right? And also your own power, like, and also what you can do and what you can't do. And
Yeah.
that's I think that's a lifetime is figuring that out, that that's that gap.
So true. I can think of, and by the way, your book is now one of them, but I have like 3 books on one of my shelves that are like, I just keep pulling them down. And I've read them countless times, and it's like, oh, I don't think that was in there before, as if magically
Right.
overnight, right? Something was placed
Yeah.
in those pages that I hadn't read, but I have, but it all depends on where I'm at today, what I'm going through, right? And
Yeah. It's the
yeah.
only one of my books that I have ever looked at after I wrote it, because it was very much something that I had just for myself for a long time, right? Like for a long time, it was just like a bunch of stories that I needed for myself, right?
Right.
And then some, like it was not something that I was like particularly interested in publishing. Like it was, so it was kind of just like, I'm going to collect these stories for myself, and then okay, if you want a book, I'll put them in. But it was, but yeah, it's the, I mean, I never read anything that I've written ever again once it's published, and except for this.
I love that. Can you tell me more about that? Do you just kind of
About
not
what?
about not looking at anything after it's published? I think that's
I
fascinating.
mean, very rarely I'll stumble across something and I'll look at it over like something I wrote, an article I wrote for something like that. But no, I'm moving forward here. Like I'm not,
I
once
love
something's
it.
done, it's done. Yeah, I don't like, if I occasionally, if I have to like look at something for reference or something like that, I will. But no, I'm once it's done, it's over for me.
Oh my gosh, I'm the same way. It's like a fever dream. Like I
Yeah,
just don't
and
even
then
know
it's
what
gone.
happened. Yeah.
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 I often wonder how musicians must feel if they write a hit song young in their life and then they're kind of obligated to play it the rest of their life. And
Does it
how
sound like torture?
it
Yeah.
does actually.
You better write a good song. I often think that. Like imagine you had to sing like "Hana na na hey 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 goodbye." Like it's all well and good to sing it like 30 times. But imagine like the 3,000th time you're singing that song. You must want to kill yourself in some casino, right?
Right.
On the other hand, I did talk to somebody who had a song like that, who shall remain nameless, and he said to me, "Well, it's an ATM. Like every time I sing it, like I get a check in the mail every time. It's like so it's like very hard to hate something that, every time you sing it you get $10,000, right? I mean, so it's,
Yeah.
like it's, yeah, I can't imagine that. I can't imagine that creatively.
That probably explains why I ran into Aerosmith at a random casino on the Olympic Peninsula in Washington.
Oh dear.
Um, I,
Lo how
I,
the
I,
mighty have fallen.
I'm sure they were getting paid a lot. It was an Indian casino.
Right.
I want to get back to that idea of kind of letting go of the fruit of our intention,
Mm.
because
Mm.
you have this reoccurring refrain of no whining, followed
Yes.
by if it was like that for Orwell or Jane Austen or Joyce or Shakespeare, Socrates, Confucius, or Jesus, why do we think it'll be any different for us?
Mm.
And I really soaked that notion up, and it really helped me reframe my expectations where I was in terms of
Yeah.
my writing. But
Yeah.
what I wonder, and I'm curious if this has come up for you, um, I wonder how a 20-year-old me would have received that, or could I have even received it
Mm.
versus
Mm.
40-year-old me. At 40 years old, after having, try to be a writer my entire life, I hear that I'm like,
Yeah.
but
Of course, it's true.
I don't know
Yeah.
about 20-year-old me. And I was just wondering if you've had that experience with sharing that with younger writers.
Well, oh, younger writers love this book, I think. Yeah, like I certainly, the ones that I've talked to, definitely appreciate, because they were all screwed, right? I mean, like it's
Mm.
not like and they also, I think actually the truth is young writers figure out pretty fast that the system is not fair,
Mm.
right? Like they're like certainly when I was in my early 20s, I thought this is a joke. Like the people who are supposed to be running this system, according to some kind of aesthetic standards or quality or something like that, it doesn't apply. I mean, I think you don't have to be you don't have to be very smart to figure that out. I also think that when you're in your 20s, you also think, well, I'm going to get lucky, right? I'm going to be the lucky one. You kind of have to believe that, honestly. Like, I think when you, and as I say in the book, like persistence is the siege you lay on fortune, right? Like after a while, you start to realize, like, it is luck, but you just have to wait. Like you're just waiting it out. Like that's a strategy as much as any strategy can be. Um,
Mhm.
I think, I don't know. It's sort of, again, it's a bit like being a person, right? Like after a while, you start to figure out, like, being a good person doesn't necessarily have immediate positive consequences. But
Mm,
being a good person in the long term is actually a way healthier way to live.
yeah.
And it does have sort of like large scale consequences. I mean, not to be too flaky about it, but I kind of think there is karma in a way. I mean, like it's like if you give out good things, eventually good things come back to you. Like like, and I think it's sort of the same thing with writing, where it's you um like you have to know that writing well does not mean that you will win prizes, get the big contracts, get all the status stuff that you want. And also you at a certain point you recognize like that status stuff isn't what you wanted anyway, right? And isn't actually worth anywhere near what you thought it was worth in your 20s, right? You see people win prizes and disappear. You see a life. Life is long. Careers are long. I think there's a certain point where you just have to recognize that like life isn't fair,
Mm,
and that is just the reality. And that doesn't mean that there's not beautiful things, and it doesn't mean you can't do things. But like, and also incidentally, that makes your own judgment of things much clearer, right? Because like there are people out there who think, oh, the prize winning books are the best books. I mean, after you've been in this business for a long time, okay, they're not, right? And so I think that's part of a maturing process. On the other hand, I think for young people, it feels much more unfair and much more unbearable. But I think they feel it just as much as older writers. Like, I don't think they're less aware of it. They just think it just fills them with hatred and loathing, which for me, it's just like, well, that's just the way of the world,
Well,
right?
what I thought was valuable is how you pointed out that there's also that tie-in with boomers and the literary
Yeah,
establishment. Like there was an exception in the past few decades in terms of success.
yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, like I mean, I was talking to a Canadian writer the other day, and she was like, "Oh yeah, we would I met on him on the plane." And I was like, "What plane are you talking about?" And she was like, "Well, the Canadian government had a plane where they would fly Canadian writers from country to country to meet publishers to help, to help international sales." And I was like, all through the 70s and the 80s. And I was like, "Well, fuck you." Like,
right.
you know what I mean? Like it was like I mean, yeah, no wonder your books were published in 8 countries. Like it's like you were
Yeah.
like they were flying you around to Hungary and Berlin and stuff. Like, I mean, like and yeah, it was very like it was an abnormal period, an atypical period, the period from the post-war to say 1995. I think in also like English departments were expanding. There was this huge glut of money, right? And that's all gone. But we're in the middle of a reframe, which is also part of the book. But I also think that's a kind of return to historical norm. Like I don't think it's the kind of thing where it's like, oh, woe is me. It's like, well, actually, this is the way it's mostly been, right?
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned it might have been a podcast interview that I heard you do, but you were talking about baseball, being the sport of failure, right? And there was some statistic,
Mm.
but if you get a certain number of hits, you're considered a success, and it was low. It was like 3
Oh
hits.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, if you hit 3 times out of 10, you are worth hundreds of millions of dollars, right? If you fail 7 out of 10 times, you're worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Like, I mean, that's why baseball is such a great game, right? Also, there's the error in baseball, which is one of the most fascinating. I actually wrote an essay about it in the New Yorker that nobody ever read, but I'm very proud of, about the nature of the error in baseball. But like it's you could have definitely written a book called Baseball and Failure.
Mm.
It too is a very, and also if you're a pitcher, you have to be you never, like there's only been 27 perfect games, so they're always failing too. Like everyone leaves a game failing, which is a very interesting reality.
Have you personally redefined the word failure for yourself over time? Because I find myself looking at, okay, what does success really mean to me? Really? And what does
Yes.
failure really
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah. I mean, for sure it's been redefined. I mean, I think I actually had a bit of a benefit because I sort of figured out, I was writing very strange and very avant-garde novels when I was young. And they were published by major house, like, they're published by Random House, and for that kind of work they did pretty well. But I also knew that given the times that we were in and given the marketplace, that these were not going to be like, and I was not going to be part of a particular scene. Also, Canadian literature is a very tight little tribe, right?
Mm.
And I was excluded from it very early, and that was a big benefit to me. That was a huge that was a great gift in many ways. Is that I knew that I would never be accepted by
Mm.
Canadian literary circles. That gave me a kind of freedom, really, and it also kept me laser focused on America and writing in the United States, which of course made a lot more sense financially and in every other way. So the ordinary terms of success, I don't know, like prizes, grants, and stuff like that kind of thing. Like I knew that none of that was going to apply to me by the time I was 30, right?
Mm.
And like by the time I was 30, I knew that was just not on the cards for me.
Mm.
Um, and so what became success to me was first of all writing what I wanted to write, like, and that is I, I've managed to do that. I write what I want to write, and to making a living from it, and which I've also managed to do. And three is like getting it into people's hands, right? I mean, that's why I really turned to writing essays rather than fiction, is because my plumber would read things that I'd written in nonfiction, right? My accountant has read my nonfiction, right? Like, and that's what I wanted. I didn't want to write for like a tiny little priestly group of writers. I wanted to have some kind of breadth. So, to me, those are kind of the terms of success,
Mm-hmm.
and and like I think but like as I say in the book, like what that success and failure in terms of writing are like, they increasingly just I've lost the sense of what they mean. I don't even think about
Mm.
that. I don't ask myself, was this a success?
Sure.
Was this a failure? I never mind, am I a success? Am I a failure? I mean, I'm 48. I'm done with that kind
Yeah.
of line of questioning. Like like I know enough to know that nobody knows if they're a success or a failure, and the people who think they're successes often are the worst failures, right? So
Right.
like it's like the term is more or less meaningless, but I would say that I do feel successful when I feel like I've written something really great. But I
Mm-hmm.
also like when I get like a random email from someone saying your book meant something to me, or you tell me that my book meant something to
Mm-hmm.
me, like it would be wrong for me to say that I don't feel like that's success,
Yeah.
right? That's like that's what I'm here for, is that feeling, that reaction.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you so, so much. And I love that you're able to make a living off of writing what you want to write. I mean, that's a
Yeah,
big deal. Yeah.
I think
And
I mean it, like, it's there's not much more you actually get,
yeah,
really,
yep,
right? Like I'm not sure there's a lot more that you get than that.
yep. Ted, did you want to ask something? Because I was going to go on to a manifesto of Jerry Maguire writing. Remember when he wrote his big thing and then submitted it the next day and was like, oh, shoot, why did I do that? And tried to get it back before it went out to all of his colleagues. I was just going to ask if, you had ever written anything that you were like, not so sure I loved that.
It's funny. It's um, I wrote a profile for Esquire magazine. They had me write a cover story about Megan Fox. You can look it up. I it was widely. I mean, it was widely discussed as like one of the worst profiles ever written. And like I honestly still like I guess it's been a couple of years, but it was certainly one of them was after COVID, where I'll get a call from a journalism department to come in to talk to their class about why this thing failed so badly, like why it blew up in my face so badly. And but I'll be perfectly honest with you. Like I go to these talks and I'm like, it is a great profile. Like you have total, if you don't think it's great, you've totally misunderstood it. Like it's actually one of the best, it's one of the best things I've ever written. And and I believe it, right?
Mm.
So like I also think one of the things that happens as you accrue things is like the best things that I've written, the things that are the most myself and the things that I am most proud of, no one has read. They are like, I
Wow.
have a piece in the New York Times today, right? I wrote it in a day. It's a good piece. They told me it was number 3 on the list of most read in the New York Times. Millions of people read it. Like that is one kind of success you could say, but like the little novel I wrote, it had a fold out map of New York in it called Love and the Mess We're In, which is the best thing that I've ever written. Probably less than 1,000 people have read it. And and that is just kind of the reality of of doing this, right? And I actually I've that was the hardest thing to get over, was that the best stuff that you write can go nowhere, right?
Mhm.
And then other things that are just sort of much more pedestrian go super viral, right?
Mhm.
And that's that. But I think I'm okay with that now. And I mean, I've certainly had things that people have attacked me for. I mean, I'm a journalist in the 21st century. Like I get my share of death threats, right? Like, but yeah, I mean, I don't really think I've had something that I published where I've been genuinely ashamed of it.
Uh-huh.
I don't think I've had that.
So good. That's the goal.
Yeah, that's a good. I mean, no, because I honestly think like one thing I had my father-in-law was a guy named Bob Fulford, who was a very great. He was the best journalist in Canada. He was a freelance writer in Canada, and he was a great guy. He's still alive. He has dementia. And he's in a hospital and hasn't spoken to him in years. But when he was a journalist, he was the best, and he gave me a lot of advice. And one thing he told me is that anytime you have, he gave really good advice. Like he said, always have 100 pens in your house, so that you never have an excuse not to write. And he said, always have the most comfortable chair that you can afford, so that it's never painful to write. And that, but right, exactly. But he also told me that anytime you get anything, no matter how small, you have to make it perfect, because that's how you get other work. And he's so right. I mean, I got my column at Esquire because of some blog post I wrote on the Toronto Star that the editor happened to read, and I put my heart into that blog post, right?
Mhm.
And like, and I so yeah, I don't think I've really kind of regard every writing opportunity, no matter how small or how you know low, shall we
Mhm.
say, as just a chance for me to do the best that I can.
I love
So,
that.
so I have a question about suffering. Um,
Hmm.
and what I came away from reading your stuff thinking was that you have an ambivalent relationship with suffering.
Mm.
Because on the one hand, in your book, you say, I don't want to believe suffering exalts. But then later you grudgingly admit that brokenness can be an insight. And that's followed by this, which you write about disquieting possibility that maybe that the best work forms itself in degradation and fear. And
Yeah.
I know this, my most awarded nonfiction book is a memoir of my time working in an orphanage for kids with HIV/AIDS, and how that
Right.
basically made me lose my mind just from the heartbreak. Amy has written,
Yeah.
you know, about her journey to sobriety, and we both have written from places of
Yeah.
fear, degradation. So I was curious about that because that stood out to me, and I feel like when we're talking about failure, I mean, there is suffering in failure of a sort. So I wanted to come back to that as kind of something I saw as kind of one of the cores to your piece.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I was trying to avoid the cliche of the suffering artist. I mean, because I think like, I think it is such a cliche. And I think I honestly think the artists that I've known in my own life, I think it's the happiest periods of my life or the most where the best work comes out of. Like I like, there's some kids out there who think like if you're drunk, it's gonna help your writing. And it's like, no, of course not. It'll take the writing like it takes everything else. Like, I mean, and I think to me, a writing is an act of health, right? And like it requires health. It requires being well, even things like being well rested and stuff like this. And so I wanted to avoid that. On the other hand, as I was going through this history, I was like, it is extraordinary how not just that suffering has led to great writing, which of course it has, but that lack of suffering seems to make writing impossible. That was the part that I was really fascinated by, where it's like where you have these writers where like literally all the doors are open to them. Like it's like whatever you want to do, you just go do it. And we'll publish it and we'll pay you a fortune. And they can't, and it's like, you need a motive for writing. I think like that to me is also another thing, right? So like you want to deal with the trauma that you saw. You want to deal with the chaos and the point, the meaningless death that encroaches, right? Like you want to impose meaning on it. That's the most natural thing in the world, right? Like that's like a very, very organic process. We've been doing that in caves, blowing ink on hands. You know what I mean? Like we're like when we encounter meaninglessness and despair and death, we don't necessarily want to get over it. We don't necessarily want to shove it aside. We just need to have it be meaningful, right? Like, that's what Nietzsche said. Nietzsche said, you can tolerate anything as long as it's meaningful. And so I think without that process, without that, when suddenly there is no grist, when suddenly there is no struggle, it kind of evaporates. Like I don't want to cherry pick examples. Of course, you can find examples of anything in the history of writing. It's such a large history, but like there were a bunch of writers like Coleridge, like Ralph Ellison. I mean, these are really excellent writers who had enormous capacities, and the moment their struggle went away, their capacity to write dissolved. And I think that's like that is I like it's not that you should embrace suffering or you need to want suffering or you should want to screw up your life in order to be a writer. Like I think that's the dumbest thing ever, right? Like there is no, as I say at one point in the book, like, there's no pattern to these biographies. Like there's people who led very comfortable lives their whole lives. There are people who were in misery from day one to the end. There are people who were in immense amounts of pain, sick people, healthy people. Like there's no pattern, right? But I would say that there is a need there to write. You need to be in the process of overcoming something, right? I think that's like I think that's almost essential. I like I don't I don't think there's a lot that is essential in writing. Like I think it comes in a lot of different ways, and one of the advantages of being in my particular position in history is that I've had to write all different kinds of things, right? And that has given me a kind of like I don't think there's one way to write at all, but I think you do need to be overcoming something in order to make something meaningful.
That's a very satisfying answer. So thanks. I want to
Yeah,
hand
I
it
mean,
over
I
to
think,
Amy. Oh, sorry.
yeah. Oh no,
Because I know we're trying to keep an eye on time, and I know that Amy has some closing
yes,
questions for you.
sure.
Well, one quick thing I wanted to say is about throwing yourself against the wall, right?
Mm.
And I loved that so much that I read it on like page 47 or something. You said it or alluded to it, and then of course we end with the epilogue, and I don't want to talk too much about it because I want people to buy the book. So,
Yeah.
but that concept of just, being driven or compelled to write something and to keep that process going, that process of writing. And I don't know, I'm even picturing, some of my stuff, which is very different, but all thematic in that it comes from suffering, is sort of the
Right.
root. And so, but I kind of think like at like a farmer's market or a garage sale, like you don't like that, maybe you'll like this. I don't know. I got this thing
Right.
over here. Is this interesting to you? And so as we wrap up, I would love to hear, and this is a little bit off topic, but to get more current,
Mhm.
death of an author and the whole AI
Oh,
thing. And just, I know that that's another topic and we don't have time to
yeah.
unpack all of it, but I'm super interested in it. And yeah.
Yeah. I mean, well, I was working with AI for a long time. Like I published an algorithmically derived story in Wired in like 2017. And I mean, where I happen to live in Toronto, is where AI was invented, like this neighborhood. And basically, my daughter likes dogs, but my wife is allergic to them. So I would take my daughter to the dog park to play with dogs. And I met all these AI people, right? And all these people who are inventing AI. And I sort of knew I mean, it was just pure chance, but I knew about it before everyone else, right? And so I've been working on, like, I wrote a story for MIT Tech Review, and I wrote one for the LA Review of Books, and I was experimenting. Like, I wrote one that was 17% generated in 2020, like when GPT-3 came out. But with the new stuff, like, and then I built Death of an Author because Jacob Weisberg at Pushkin asked me if I would do it, which I did. I mean, it is interesting because of all the creative projects that I've ever worked on, this is the one that has the most resistance to it. Like, it is. If you want to talk about throwing yourself at the door, trying to get publishers, like magazines. I mean, I know it sounds crazy, but the resistance to AI generated work is so pronounced
Mhm.
that it's essentially crippling. I mean, I wrote a really fascinating story with a large language model company here in Toronto called Cohere, and it was a infinite generative story. Like, it was a story where it was the same characters and the same things were happening, but it was told, the machine would tell it differently every time. So every time you clicked on the story online, it would be the same story told differently. And I thought this was a pretty extraordinary artifact. I mean, this was like an infinite narrative, and no one, I couldn't get anyone interested in it. I mean, not even to the tiniest bit. And I mean, now it's like literally like there's no one left to reject it. So it's, in a drawer basically somewhere. But AI is totally fascinating. I don't think we've figured out how to use it. The resistance from I mean, the resistance from the creative community in the West, like in Japan, a woman just won the major literary prize for a 5% AI generated
Ah,
novel. And Chinese writers have been using it for a long time, right? Like, they've been using it to write science fiction, for a long time. How we're going to get to the point where we figure out how to use it creatively, is very tricky. I mean, I have a contract to um, fill in the basically the missing holes of the Epic of Gilgamesh, using AI, and I'm working on that right now. There are a bunch of very interesting experiments on it, but there's a lot of resistance to it. I mean, to a shocking degree.
so interesting. And what is next for you? Do you have any, I mean, and can't disclose too much,
Yeah.
I'm sure, but do you have anything big on the horizon?
Oh, I'm writing like I mean, I've got the AI projects. I've got a bunch of articles coming out soon. I've been working on a book for almost 15 years that's coming to an end, that's
Ah,
coming to its sort of conclusion. I'm getting there. So, and it's like totally out of control. It's like 300,000 words. It's totally out of control. But that's like, so there's a lot of, yeah, I mean, there's a lot. I'm a worker. Like I published 3 books last year, right? I during COVID I asked God to work me to death, and I think he's agreed.
And do you get up at 4 a.m. to write?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
I started that when my children were very young.
I that's my best time to write too, and people just don't understand me.
Yeah.
But the reward of those hours are just you. If you don't get it, you don't get it.
Mm.
Well, I actually read there was a period where in like the late 2010s where I had a column at Esquire, and they asked me to write for them 3 times a week, and then I got a 2-book deal. And so I had I was maxed out. Like literally every minute of the day was like, how am I going to fill it? And so I actually decided to research like how to be efficient, like how to not necessarily be efficient, but how to concentrate, right? And I read this report by this Harvard Business School study on concentration. And she said that the most that you can concentrate in any given moment at any given time is about 52 minutes. And then she also said that if you get the 52 minutes of grade A concentration in your intellectual life every day, you're basically like Leonardo da Vinci. And like I actually think like the key, people think they're impressive by working hard, if you're writing at 3 p.m, I mean, I'm napping. You should I think the key is to get that hour of really top grade work. Like if you get that hour, everything else will with the writing process will kind of take care of itself, right? I really kind of believe that. And so yeah, I'm up at 4 a.m. to get that hour.
Mm-hmm.
And then get another couple of hours where it's like second tier work, and then I just sleep. I go right back to sleep and try to do it again.
I love it. Stephen Marsh.
Don't get me started talking about sleep, because that's like that's like LA dieting stuff. I will get really boring really fast.
Getting a good night's sleep and taking naps is part of my process too, and I'm almost embarrassed to tell people because they don't understand it's part of my work and they think I'm just being lazy.
I'm up to nearly 10 hours a day sleep now, and if I could get it higher, I would. I consider it like carb loading for now. Now I'm talking about it, but like I consider it like carb loading for an athlete. Like I think I take it deadly seriously. Nothing comes before my sleep, like parties, whatever, like nothing.
Mm-hmm.
So like yeah, but okay, I'll stop talking about it.
And I think we might make Amy jealous because being a mom of 8, I imagine sleep is something hard to find.
Someday.
Oh my God. Someday.
Someday.
Oh my God. I think if you have 8, I don't know if you'll ever sleep again.
I think I'm more in the Hemingway, like crazy type.
Right.
I'm in that camp right now. That's goals for me, you guys.
Yeah.
And I want to thank you both. You guys, I mean, I feel like I'm just, Stephen, having you here is just like, I feel like I'm amongst greatness with the two of you, but truly, I want to just convey to you, you have changed with this book, the inner topography and landscape of what is going on inside of me as I learn to grow and process, not only in my craft, but in my personal life and my self-awareness. And this has been huge for me. So thank you for writing it. Ted, thank you for introducing me to On Writing and Failure by Stephen Marsh.
Thanks for having me, guys. It's really been a great talk.
Thank you so much.
So much. Have a good one. Keep up the good work.
All right. Yeah, I got to jump out of here, but really nice to talk to you guys.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you so much for listening to Eternally Amy, a mum of 8's journey from jail to joy. Amy Liz Harrison is a best-selling author, speaker, 12-step coach, meditation teacher, and recovery advocate. To find out more, please visit amylizharrison.com. You can keep up with Amy on all platforms by following @Amy Liz Harrison. Please subscribe and review this podcast. It means so much to us if you do.